And this is the second industry-specific event, which is around employment and skills. And the third one's going to be around startup culture, which is going to be next year. But those kind of three areas, startups and entrepreneurialism, employment and skills, and culture and hospitality, destination tourism, the arts, they were three areas that we just felt were kind of priority areas for our community. And that's why we've kind of started with them. Oh, there you go. I'm always terrible with these kind of staggered bullet points. Okay, so these are the three questions we've used throughout the series to guide the conversation. Obviously, it's about reducing inequalities in COVID recovery, really. So it's about how we can build back better in a more equal and fair way. So the three questions we've used are: what are the challenges around building back equal? What are the changes you would like to see? And what tips and best practice can you share? And that's what we've basically used for the previous two building back equal events, and it's what we're going to use to guide kind of the panel session, but also the breakout rooms as well. We'll use these three questions and obviously dive a bit deeper into all of them in that time. So here we are at the panel kind of stage of the thing, of the event. I'm gonna be dead cheeky and ask the panel guests to introduce themselves, because I was saying just before the call, I always think it's much better. They always do a much better job of it than we do. Can I start with Amanda, please?
Sure. So I'm a senior manager at EPAM, which is a 50,000 wide global technology company, but I also sit on the digital and creative board at the LEP. I'm also a member of the British Interactive Media Association, so very often I can compare what's going on in the region to national as well.
That's great. Paul, can I come to you next, please?
I'm Paul Amann. I work at the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority in the policy area for employment and skills, with particular focus on narrowing the gaps. And through my work in employment and skills over the last 25 years or more, I've probably helped several thousand people into jobs through various different initiatives from European funding, etc., that I'm also responsible for. And I'm getting a lot of feedback from somebody. Thank you. And I'm also responsible for developing and founding the LGBT plus supporters group for Liverpool football fans, Cop Outs, and a number of other equality initiatives on both race and LGBT issues.
I've got to shout out the fact that you got to sit down with Klopp recently.
I did get to sit down with Jürgen, and that was absolutely awesome.
Tracy, could I come to you next, please?
I saw that interview, Paul. It was very, very good. I'm Tracy Fishwick. I founded Transform Lives Company about 8 years ago. We're a not-for-profit. We work in the city supporting people into employment. Like Paul, been doing that for a long time. My background was in the public sector, and I've worked across Greater Manchester as well. Currently also working on Kickstart and supporting quite a lot of young people across the city and some of the businesses. It's lovely to see some of them are here today as well. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Tracy. Ben, can I come to you last, please?
Hi everyone, Ben Osu. I am leading on strategy at the Anthony Walker Foundation, which for those of you that don't know, was set up after Anthony was murdered in a racist attack in Huyton in 2005. So we go into schools and communities and do a lot of work around anti-racism, and also supporting victims who are supporting people who are victims of hate crime. And then also Aaron, I can see Aaron's put on there my new role with the Combined Authority and Growth Platform, and that is as Deputy Chair of the Business Support Working Group, which is focusing around race equality and trying to support businesses on their journey to kind of explore and how they can be more fair and equal and just when it comes to supporting people from Black and minority ethnic communities.
Okay, thank you for that, everybody. Just before we start, could I just in fact, that should be all right. Can I just test something? Does that change between tabs when I do that?
It does, yeah.
And could I send you this link, please, to share your screen for me?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
This is the point at which we expect some intermission music. Come on out.
You know what? We always think about getting some fire-related music. Try and think about either. There's loads of options. We talk about Prodigy, or we talk about.
I feel like that one's too aggressive.
Yeah, probably.
For holding music.
I would
Not
say
aggressive enough.
Maybe we should have a a different soundtrack for each event, ties in with the theme.
Okay, I'm looking. You just when you're ready. There's no massive rush for it. To be fair, just share your screen when you get them slides up.
Yeah, bear with me. Sorry.
Yeah, there's no rush for it. We can start without them anyway. So we're gonna do a Q&A, but I'll kind of start and get the ball rolling for the conversation, and then at any point, if anyone's got any questions or they want to chip in and ask any of the panel a question, then feel free. And you can do that either by just sticking your hand up visually, and hopefully either me or one of the team will see you, or you can use the raise your hand feature using the reactions button down the bottom. So if you click that, it'll come up with a few options, like you can clap, you can raise your hand, you can do some laughing faces or hearts or whatever. Okay, so I think I'll come to Paul first. Can you just tell me a little bit about kind of your role and the work you've done around employment and skills?
So at the Combined Authority, we've got responsibility through devolution to look at the employment and skills needs of the city region, and the starting point for our city region isn't brilliant. We've got more economically inactive people. That's people who aren't even registered as unemployed, but perhaps mostly due to health and disability issues, are people who aren't expected to get jobs. And we've got a higher proportion of such people than virtually any other part of the country, which is morally really, really difficult, but economically it also represents a problem for the city region. What we have been trying to do is to provide the right support measures to help people get the right skills and get into job opportunities. But what we've also learned, as both Tracy and myself have mentioned, we've been working in this area for quite a long time, is that it's not enough to get people into jobs. We did that with Liverpool One. We got 18, and Liverpool One is often seen as a barometer of where the city is at in terms of race employment, for instance. Actually, when Liverpool One opened, of the new jobs at Liverpool One, we got 18% from Black communities, which was fantastic. What we didn't do enough of, and the big challenge for me, is to focus on their retention and their progression and enable more people to come into the organisations. Obviously, Liverpool One opened during a period when we had lots of public money to support people. And then shortly afterwards, we've had much, much less money to do some of that follow-up work on retention and progression that we now know really should have been focused on as well. Because there's no point getting somebody into an organisation to start a job if there isn't support around them. And this brings us on to another of the big issues that we've got that we don't have an automatic lever for, is culture in employment. So the culture of organisations and how they treat people fairly and equally and justly is not the same across all the employers of the city region. I think we've probably all got experience of managers, of colleagues, of people who don't do or say the right things and make it very, very difficult to be your authentic self in the workplace. And unfortunately, those sorts of attitudes are part of a culture that is really hard to change in and of itself, because the people with the power are often the people with the culture issues. And we've got to try and use as many means possible to adopt change. Now, we're very lucky at this point in time in that we're not in the 1990s, we're not in the 1980s when actually things were incredibly harder. We're at a point in history where people have woken up through issues such as Black Lives Matter and the tragic death of George Floyd to say enough's enough. And in the combined authority, we've had both a political leadership statement made about race and making sure that that's very high up on the agenda. And we've got big investment programs starting through the race equality program, but also to look at the other equality strands where the numbers are even bigger than race to deal with, and that's disability. So I'm doing an awful lot of work at the moment on engaging with people with lived experience. Myself as an individual, I happen to be of Black heritage, I'm a gay man, I'm disabled, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I've got all the answers for all the people who share similar characteristics. But I do have the opportunity of reach into those various communities and at least start the conversations to find out what works for people and what works well, what doesn't work, and how we can develop programs that actually hit the mark far, far better to help people really flourish in our city region. So I don't know if there's anything more you wanted to know there.
No, I think that was really good. I think that was really good opening and like a good way to get us started. Having technical difficulties, so that's fine. Tracy, could I come to you with the same question? Can you just tell me a little bit about the work you've done around employment and skills, please?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me as well.
Very well.
A couple of the other Firestarters, and it's always just been really nice to connect with people that you wouldn't normally get to meet. So sometimes we just stay in our tracks, don't we, in our work, and that's what I love about these events, is just the diversity of sectors and the people that you manage to attract to the chat. So the work that I've been doing, I suppose, really since the late 90s, and a lot of this was in Knowsley. Somebody mentioned Highton before, and Anthony Walker, and I was working in the council at the time when that happened. Worked really on trying to be that bridge between where there are jobs, and all that time there have always been jobs. And we can get on to whether they're any good and all the rest of it, but there's a disconnect between the fact that there are jobs available, and we hear it now, you know, X thousand of jobs in this sector and that sector, and thousands of people who are, for whatever reason, claiming some form of benefit and not able to work, or don't feel that they can work. And it's almost like never the twain shall meet, you know. And why is that? You know, and trying to work out really why it is that we have lots of vacancies and lots of jobs quite a lot of the time, and lots of people who seemingly are looking for work and don't find that work. And I've sort of like been in that space all that time trying to work out what, and there's lots of complex reasons. And so that for us is working with people who haven't been in work for a very long time. Some people who've never been in work and could be in their 40s or 50s. People who've had oftentimes trauma. And that sounds like quite a you know, a scary word in a way, but trauma of or loss of a job, what they thought was going to happen and hasn't turned out that way in terms of being made redundant or that sort of thing. but also things that happen around illness and disability. And also lots of things around, you know, increasingly meeting quite a lot of people who are living in a violent situation in their lives, people who are new to the city. And, you know, imagine, you know, arriving somewhere and, you know, not knowing anyone and trying to work out, you know, your place in there. And so lots of people for who there doesn't seem to be like a support network or a team around them. And I think I'd sum it up as, often we hear, you know, getting a job feels like sort of like survival of the fittest, you know. It's a competition, isn't it? And you know, the best people get hired, and you know, that tends to be certain kinds of people, perhaps. And I don't think it's about the survival of the fittest. I think it's survival of the nurtured, the people who are nurtured, people who've got a team around them, people who've got those cheerleaders, people who've got role models, people who have got connections and networks. And so I've lost my job a couple of times, and what I do is I go to my network and I pick up the phone and I know people, and something often can happen. If I don't have that, that's like 80% of the way that you get a job gone. It's not there. And so actually there's lots of things and layers of things that we need to put in place. And that's what we've been working on, and that's the sort of stuff that we do.
Okay, thanks for that, Tracy. It'd be good to hear about, I'll come back to you on that, but it'd be good to hear specifically about like a lot of the work you've been doing with young people, because I know you've been doing loads of stuff with young people in like recent years, haven't you?
Yeah, done a lot of work with young people back in the 90s with New Deal, and then with Future Jobs Fund and Kickstart, all the same stuff. It's the same. It's just called something different, and a different political party has decided to put a different name on it. But yeah, come back to that.
Amanda, can I come to you next, please? Can you tell me a little bit about some of the work you've done in this space?
Well, I can tell you what I'm doing at the moment, because I've done a lot, so otherwise I'd be here for hours perhaps. But I think really how I started this journey is probably the best part, is looking at, I started it from a female diversity point of view, and looking at why were there less women in my industry, in the tech industry, because we were still like 19%, that was it. And as I rose up through my career, it got less and less and less. And actually one of the things that Paul talks about in terms of that diversity and in terms of culture is a real problem in the digital industry, because it's been formed by white men having conversations in pubs. That's how our whole industry had formed traditionally. And of course that culture carried on, and because of biases, people hired the same people who were like them. So that caused a real sort of diversity issue in many ways. And I started looking at, from a woman's point of view, what was that diversity? And that was quite a few years ago that I started looking at that. And then that led me down different tracks and looking at how do we get more women in, and actually how do we get more young women coming through. We know that young women coming into our industry is once again very slow, and that got me starting to look at where does the conversation start with young girls. And I was involved in Liverpool Girl Geeks, as it was now known as Innovate Her, their first boot camp. I ended up chairing the Young Talent Council for the British Interactive Media Association, and I still spearhead an event called Digital Day, which is a nationwide event to bring school children through into the digital industry and give them a sort of a taster really about what our industry is like, and really trying to focus on some of those pupils who might not think that the industry is for them, because all they see is white male faces very often. When you look at the people at the top of our industry and the people who get the voices, they are the Bill Gates, they were the Steve Jobs, they are the Elon Musks. That's who, you know, people see as, you know, our industry really, and that's not particularly true now. However, you know, when we look at the stats in our industry, it is really poor in terms of all sorts of areas, including the socioeconomic areas in our industry. Now, one of the biggest things as well is we need a diverse workforce in our industry in all levels to be able to build better products. And you know, we can see that quite heavily when the likes of Amazon, when they released Alexa, wouldn't respond to a woman's voice, where you have other AIs who don't respond to black faces, and we see that in passport software and all sorts of things. That's because the teams working on them aren't diverse in the first place. So there's not only a moral reason we need to do it, but actually, when you look at it, there's also an economic gain for the region. There's a non-economic gain for individuals, but also there is a real gain in terms of society and the products that we receive out of companies like mine and the Googles of this world, to make sure that they can be used by everybody and bring them forth. And one of the challenges we have, particularly in the Liverpool City region, is digital exclusion, in terms of those who don't have access or be able to use the internet, or be able to use digital technology. And when things are moving forward, such as your COVID passport is all on an app, you know, we have a lot of people who are excluded for one reason or not just from employment, but being able to build those skills to come back. And we're seeing in our industry, those digital skills, and we see it in schools as well, the kids in school say digital is not a subject. Digital is a red thread through everything. And if we are going to improve people's employability to be able to come into any industry, they need to have those digital skills. So in English, they want to learn Word. In art, they want to learn Photoshop. It's not having lessons that are just digital, because actually digital is a touch point throughout our lives. And that's something that before the pandemic, I was invited in to speak to the government and DCMS about that. And hopefully that will happen at some point. And I can get back in to see DCMS and say, hey, how do we change this so that we actually bring those skills to kids, so that actually they've got better employability skills in every industry to come through, and we can try and curb some of that digital exclusion. And then the most recent thing, how it's moved on, is we're seeing some great organisations such as Agent Academy, who are really looking at how do we bring young people through, and obviously Innovate Her, who are doing the same. And there is a lot of work going on now to bring young people through into our industry. However, something I've been working with the Combined Authority on, and that we've really hit recently, is the lack of experienced talent in our region. And that's not just in digital and creative. When we've gone to other sectors, we have a real issue in terms of having experienced talent that we can hire. And in our industry, we've had a 30% growth in some jobs, but they need skills of a year and above. So this is not entry-level talent from young or those who are converting into our industry. And if we can't build those people and bring those people into our companies, then actually we can't have growth in that entry level and create the employment that we need to bring the people who don't have the experience through, whether they are university, whether they're school, whether they're apprentices. That's one of the biggest challenges we've got as a region at the moment. And we're looking at now, I'm working with the Combined Authority and other sectors in terms of how do we change that? How do we bring those people through so we can create more employment at lower levels to bring people through to our different sectors and be able to support them. So that's me.
That was great, thanks. And lastly, Ben, can I come to you, please? Can you talk just a little bit about not just the employment and skills, but the work you've done around equality and kind of diversity in general, and even you know, I know you've done a lot of work with the Anti-Walk Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please? Yeah,
so my background is probably community development, community engagement, kind of moving more into kind of like the private sector business development type of work as well, but always through the lens of EDI and specifically anti-racism. And so, for instance, I started one of my first ever jobs was with a housing association called Steve Biko Housing, which is a social landlord here in Liverpool, and they was set up after a report was published by Liverpool City Council in, I think, the 80s, which said that the council had biases when it came to its housing allocations policy, and it was favouring those people and families who were from white backgrounds rather than those who were from communities of colour and black backgrounds. And what they set out to do was to readdress that balance and really tackle racism within communities. And then that job kind of snowballed into a number of other different jobs and opportunities. And running through that always has been my involvement with the Anthony Walker Foundation. And it's a nice story. It's a good PR story, because I started with the foundation at the age of about 12 as a young ambassador on one of their first youth programs. And now I'm one of the senior leaders within the organization. And I'm one of those people who is always manages to weave things that aren't quite in their job description into their job, just to make sure that they get to do something and work on things. And so throughout my career, whether that's been in social housing or whether that's been in a social enterprise called Health at Work, where we did health and well-being for businesses, I've always weaved my roles and my kind of love for the foundation into those jobs. And for those that know me, know that I've been around for a long time, even though I'm like not yet 30, but I feel like I'm about 60. I'm tired, guys, okay? I've been around and I've worked for a number of different organizations and even tried to work for myself. But the work for the foundation has been probably the most recent piece of work that I've been doing. It's been the most timely piece of work that I've been doing, and contemporary, and it's needed now more than ever. And we know what happened to George Floyd, and G Walker, who set up the foundation, Anthony's mum, she was on BBC Breakfast this morning because she's just received the Pride of Britain Award, which is on tonight at 8 p.m. So on ITV, if you want to tune in. And they were saying in the interview that, it's 2021 and there's still a need for the work of the foundation, and there is, and it's shit that there's still a need for the foundation. It's shit that we're having these conversations still about how do we make society and workplaces equal and better for people who are not just the norm kind of straight white male. And so the foundation has took a bit of has come to a bit of a turning point recently, where we're still doing the work that we do in schools and communities, whether that be educational programs or supporting victims of hate crime. But what we found is that we're also doing a lot of work with employers. And that work is looking at how we educate them so that they are more literate when it comes to racism and how it is established and how it impacts people. And actually, it's not just someone calling you the M word or the P word or whatever. It's all those little nuanced little things that you can't quite put your finger on, but it's something there, and you didn't get that promotion, but you're just as good as everyone else, and you don't really know why, but you can't quite say, well, that's because I'm black, but you kind of sometimes know that it is because you're black. And that won't always be the case, but it is also the majority of the time the case. So we're working with employers to do some work around that. We're also working with employers to do some work around how they interact with people from black communities and communities of colour, and how they recruit them, because they don't know. They just think that they will put their job advert out on LinkedIn and that people will come flocking, but actually that's not the case. And we know that people from communities of colour are generally in working class disadvantaged communities also, and that you need to do a little bit more work in terms of engaging with those people if you really want to make the difference. And then I think it's something that what Paul said before, and he was saying that Liverpool one is almost the barometer of how well the city's doing in terms of its diversity and equality kind of work. And you can still walk around Liverpool one now and not see many, if any, black faces working in the shops. And that is, you know, something that I know people now who are in their 60s and 70s have been saying for the last 30, 40 years, and still we can't get that balance right. And Paul also mentioned retention, and that's something else that we're doing. It's about, okay, once we get black people into organizations, or gay people into organizations, or disabled people into organizations, or women or trans or whatever, how do we then make those organizations safe spaces for those people to thrive and feel comfortable and safe with who they are? And so therefore that's kind of shaping some of the work that we're doing now moving forwards. And for me, and I always say this is a personal view, and you know, I will always, I assume that everyone in the foundation agrees with this, but for me, we will only ever really tackle institutional discrimination, again, whether that be racism or sexism, misogyny, or homophobia, whatever it might be, if we really economically empower people from those communities. I am very fortunate that I can walk home from work, stumble into Fredericks or the Quarter, and buy a bottle of wine and have some dinner, and be sat next to someone who I might strike up a conversation with, and that leads to an opportunity. Not everyone that lives in the communities, disadvantaged communities where people of colour generally are, have that luxury, because they have to think about buying electricity or gas or feeding kids, or, you know, their bus fare for work, or whatever it might be. And so therefore they don't get the opportunity to really grow, because they can't put themselves in that situation. I've always been a loud, confident, cheeky kid, as a lot of people have seen me, and I've never been backwards in coming forwards. And I think, you know, I thank a lot of people who have mentored me and supported me over the years for allowing me to be that. And I wish that every young person had that opportunity and those opportunities that I had, because we would be a lot further along from where we currently are. And so for me, everything that we do in the foundation now needs to, in some way, economically empower people from minority backgrounds. And this is another thing about when we're talking about, okay, let's get, you know, let's look at statistics, or let's put some quotas on jobs, or how are we going to get people from these communities in. Everyone always reverts back to things like apprenticeships, or the lowest form or level of jobs or employment. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we also have to go, okay, well, you know, just because your organization looks like it's diverse doesn't mean that it actually is, because if your diversity is at the bottom end of the pay scales and not running all the way through, then you're probably doing just as bad a job as not having anyone in the organization at all. And so that's what we're trying to do at the Anthony Walker Foundation.
That was really good, thanks. I'm conscious of the fact we're going to be going into the breakout rooms in like 5 minutes. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to just either stick them in the chat, or you can raise your hand with the function, like I was saying before. I think we've got a question actually. Jack, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure, we've got time. It's more just a question for, like, I think Amanda and Ben both touched on this. I found that when I went to university, so I'm from quite a working class backgrounds. Where I went to university in Edinburgh, there's a lot of people from more middle class backgrounds. And one of the things that I found most striking was what you were saying about networks, that there was definitely a difference in mindset in terms of looking for jobs, which really struck me quite vividly. So from my experience, when you look for a job, it's quite a binary thing. You go on to, like, Indeed, look for jobs. You go on to, you know, job searching websites, and you find a job that way. Whereas from a working middle class perspective, it's more you use your network, you know people who know people, that sort of thing. How, you're not going to be able to answer it in a 5-minute thing, I'm aware, but how would you go about changing that mindset amongst the working class to be able to think that it's not actually just a binary decision? There are more than one way to get a job.
Can I answer first, Ben? You're happy for me to. I don't think it's the responsibility of the working class to do that. It's the responsibility of employers to make sure that they are networking with other people who can bring that diversity into their organizations. It's absolutely not the responsibility of those who are not getting the jobs. And that's and the employers have to take that on themselves to do it, because it does, you know, as I say, you've got a moral side of it, but actually there's also a real big advantage to the employer in doing that. In having a diverse workforce, we know that it actually adds to their profit. All the research shows it. So, you know, if they're really that cutthroat, then you can talk to them about that. But yeah, it's not teaching the working class how to do it. It's showing employers that actually they need to reach out further than their little gang that they've got there, that it very often is.
Yeah, I wouldn't say much different, to be honest with you. I think what I would say is we all have a responsibility to help each other. And the only reason that, or one of the only reasons why I had the opportunities was that, you know, people have seen, you know, whatever it was in me that they thought, you know, this guy can do great things and we want to support him to do that. And I think there's a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And what I had actually was sponsorship, and people actually not just giving me a bit of advice, but people putting me forward for stuff and people recommending me for work. And I think that's one of the key elements to doing that, is us going, okay, if we recognize something in someone, and we might not do it as employees of a specific organization, but we might just do it as ourselves and going, let's see what we can do to help Jack or whoever it might be.
Tracy, can I come to you?
I think it was me that said, I think the statistic around the percentage of, you know, how people get jobs, and just building on what Amanda and Ben have said quite rightly. I think increasingly people, and it's not just young people, we work with people of all ages. People generally think they sit in front of a screen. You just said Indeed, I think, Indeed.com, or, you know, Total Jobs, this, that, and the other. There's how many is there of them, right? It's the most soul-destroying way to look for a job. You know, it wasn't around when I was your age. And so you'd think that that was a great tool. And I suppose in some respects it is. But actually, that is not how most people get a job. And what we do is we specifically teach people how to map out what we call their hidden jobs market. Now, Ben's just been talking about his without saying those words. The people who took him under his wing, the people who know what he does, the people who can vouch for him, the people he can ring, the people who might be in his Facebook, if he's in Facebook, probably isn't, he's too cool for Facebook. All of those things. And no one teaches you that stuff. And I think there is something though about being working class, whatever that means as well. But let's just take that we don't grow up with mums and dads and family members who've got that either. So I've done a lot of work in the cultural sector, working with theatres and arts and creative venues around attracting young people to work there, because they know that nearly everybody who gets a job in those places, a bit like Amanda was saying, maybe in her sector, it's word of mouth. Someone's auntie works at the Royal Exchange in Manchester, and they're the ones who get the internship. You know, and also, by the way, they could afford to go and do the internship for free, which working class kid can do that? So breaking down those barriers, there's like systemic change that we need, but it's also kind of like the tricks of the trade. Like, let's have what everybody else has got in terms of the little tricks of the trade in their toolkit. It's not exclusive to so people with certain backgrounds. And people generally just do not know some of those things that can really work for you. So I think it's at both ends, but I do think it's completely down to employers to change their behaviour and to try a lot harder to do the things that they need to do. But let's face it, most employers are lazy. They are. I work with them all the time. They're lazy.
Yeah.
And they say a lot of things and they don't do them.
Yeah, I think there's always that classic thing of like needing to be able to see a path to what you want to do. It's like you can't be what you can't see thing. And I'm a classic example of that because my brother, who's 5 years older than me, also works in digital marketing, which is quite pathetic, but I basically just copied his whole path into a career. Paul, can I come to you next, please?
I think these are fantastic question, Jack, because I look at my own background and where I started and so on. I was brought up in Grimsby. You couldn't get a more working class place. I had free school meals. I understand some of the pressures that can exist from what your background's about. And then when you go to university, if you're lucky enough, you're suddenly immersed in a world where every second person, public school and all the rest of it. And it is a really, really different and difficult transition. And my first job in Liverpool was in Burger King on Ranelagh Street. We all start somewhere. I fell out of work I think at a similar time to when Tracy did, when you left Knowsley, in around 2013. And I was looking for jobs in a very competitive job market at that point. And mine was using any application, any job that was advertised in the public sector, in the charity sector. 7 months I was applying for jobs, 190 applications, 19 interviews. And what I'd say is the most important thing is perseverance and never stop believing in yourself. Your ability to get somewhere is not defined by somebody else's judgment of you. Your ability to get there is down to what you can achieve and how you can pull people around you to help you. I have a fantastic husband who always had me back and always held me up when times were tough. And you've got to get the resources in your life to help you when times are tough. I got 19 job interviews. I came second 6 times. It was dead infuriating. It wasn't becoming a good thing to come second anymore. It was becoming like, when am I actually going to get through this? But I did. And the other important thing I'd always say is your next job is not necessarily your destination. Getting a job is often just a stepping stone towards the rest of your career and your rest of your opportunities. Burger King was not something I did because I wanted to flip burgers for my life. I did it out of necessity, but it gave me a whole bunch of skills that are still useful today. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. We heard quite a lot about kind of support networks, which I think is really important. Lewis, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. My question is for Paul. I had something very similar. So I come from a background. I come from South America. I've been living here for 6-7 years now. So I have to basically grind from the bottom to the top. Like right now, for me to find like an actual job after studying for 6 years and trying to apply and go to interviews and really not getting anywhere was really frustrating for me, because I was like, oh, like I've been preparing for so long and I'm good in what I do, and it's basically not enough. And that time, basically 3 months, nothing. And in the middle of it, I found a job. I was basically a construction worker at the Baltic market, and I was like the worst winter I've ever lived in my life. building outside for hours and hours. I remember coming home and I was basically just blacked out because I was so tired of working. And thankfully to Matchstick, they gave me this really good opportunity to work with them. And that's why I'm here on the first event. So basically my question is, like even though you went through so many stages, like what was the extra mile that you went through to get the actual first job?
I think partly it was taking feedback from those unsuccessful interviews and being humble enough to actually listen. Sometimes the feedback's a load of nonsense, and accept that. Sometimes feedback can be really, really helpful and empowering. And I'd always say, ask for feedback, even if the people who are going to give you the feedback aren't necessarily the best in the world, because it can be helpful. But the other thing, and I think this is a parallel with Ben, is I volunteered a huge amount, and the volunteering has given me a whole set of life skills and networks and information that really informed everything I've ever done since I started volunteering. And it also gives you, not just a richer network of people in your life, but a better sense of purpose, because you can do what you want to be doing when you're volunteering, because you can choose to put your skills into something you believe in. And you don't always get that privilege when you're in a paid job. I hope that's helpful.
I can see we've got a question. Well, Amann, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to back what Paul says there on volunteering. I run a music festival in the summer as head of production, which I've now done since 2013, so 7 years. Obviously it hasn't gone the past couple of years, and that was purely through volunteering that I've got the experiences and the skills to run a 4-day outdoor music festival as head of production with like almost 100 crew just for me, sort of thing. And that was because I started out putting my hand up going, I think I can help you. Can I do some stuff? And currently I volunteer, I still do that, but on a Saturday I volunteer at my local Clare House shop, because I wanted to learn about merchandising, for example, and shop window merchandising. I really love fashion, so I wanted to learn about that and bring my skills to them. And actually that's given me a whole new lot of learning from that, and also to learn about the third sector and how they work, and retail and how it turns around and rotates stuff. So I've learned a whole new lot of stuff from that. So I can't back Paul enough. And if you can volunteer and can afford to volunteer, even if it's just 1 day a month, some of these places will do it. Just go ahead and offer your skills and help.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've done my fair share of volunteering and getting involved in kind of community projects and things that I'm passionate about, just to try and open that door for me. Greg, can I come to you next?
Yes, there we go. Sorry, I was struggling to unmute myself. Yeah, I guess there was two things that I was thinking about there. One, I suppose, is just, I'm probably from a fairly similar background to Jack, and with that point about sort of being from a working class background, and I was one of the only people in my family who's been able to go to university. Didn't manage to make it to Edinburgh. I was in Salford, slightly different, and I perhaps didn't quite get the level of sort of affluent kind of public school people who were going to Salford Uni, but that sort of sense that there's a sort of slightly wider world, but it's something that's not like that kind of concept of you don't know what you don't know. And so on one hand, I totally appreciate the points about trying like sort of volunteer and sort of the idea of like network hacking and all that sort of stuff. I think if you don't have the awareness that those are even skills or things that you might need to do, it becomes difficult to kind of chase after them because you don't even know that that's a thing. You know, I think where I've been kind of fortunate in that sort of way is that like people in my family have you know, I've never really had a whole lot, but the whole thing was that they've been motivated to try and do things and feel, you know, either out of stubbornness or some kind of arrogance, I don't know, but to try and do something. And if, you know, if there isn't an opportunity for them to sort of try and figure out what it is that they can kind of create for themselves. And I think one of the things that I've found personally is that, you know, I haven't always been able to get a job. You know, I sort of struggled, and there's lots of things that I felt should be that, like, these should be possibilities for people, but they don't really exist, or they don't necessarily exist in a typical kind of work environment. And in a way, that's part of the thing that we sort of brought into sort of Matchstick Creative, is that you know, it's the kind of a company that didn't exist for us. And so I guess part of my sort of background is through, like, you know, like Amanda, you mentioned music events and things like that. You know, I come musically from a sort of DIY punk background, and that sort of idea of people putting on shows and doing things. And you know, I've met a ton of people through that who've been like, oh, well, you can do that yourself. It's a thing that you can do. Whereas before that, you kind of thinking, oh, well, I need to wait for the record label to decide if I'm good enough for a thing. And you know, I feel like it's kind of similar with jobs. You know, you kind of, as Jack mentioned, you look on the job sites, and, you know, my mom has very much sort of had that experience. You know, we talked about how soul destroying it is, sort of looking through job adverts. Paul, as you mentioned, you know, applying for a ton of jobs, not quite getting there, and how soul destroying that whole process is. And there's a ton of people who've got very clear kind of skills and talents who don't necessarily know sort of how you can navigate kind of either using those to kind of get the job, kind of build the network, or whatever it is, or to create the kind of thing that you know, you can kind of be empowered to have as your own thing. So yeah, I'm in danger of waffling on there, but I did have a kind of a question as well, which was just a couple of the points that sort of came out was you know, this thing about the impetus is on the person, let's say the working class person in Jack's example, but you know, you need the people who have got the jobs to kind of want to kind of create the safe spaces and do more. And so it's kind of, if those are the people who need to do more, but who are the least engaged in doing something about it, how do you kind of connect with them in a way that kind of helps them to, you know, understand what, I mean, maybe it's not even understand sort of why they should do it, but to actually try and help that to happen. It's not for a particular person, but I don't know if there's anyone who wants to chime in.
Go on, Tracy.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think that what seems to me to be missing a lot of the time, and I said it before, like the disconnect, but people find it very hard to navigate their way around a system, if you like, whether that's, okay, so you've got the job centres, colleges and different institutions for training, organisations like Transform Lives, of which there are quite a lot, and lots of other things in between. And how do you know? How is the average person in the street supposed to know where all that stuff is? And most people find things by happen chance. That's basically what it is. There isn't a thing in the phone, which, oh, my cat just came up there. There isn't a thing in your phone. Like, I can order any food from anywhere in this phone. I can book I can get to the other side of the world from this phone, basically, but I can't find out what's within a 2-mile radius that might help me to find a job, help someone to help me with my particular skills, or maybe to mentor me, or go on some kind of course. So even Kickstart, look at what's happening with Kickstart, and Aaron will know this, like create lots of opportunities. Can we find people to fill them? Because they don't know where to look for them. And there's a massive gap there. So it relies on sometimes just some kind of witchcraft, I don't know, that people get lucky. And those are the people probably who've got a little bit of, again, I'll go back to maybe a little bit of prior knowledge, somebody around them who might be able to go, look there, point there, do that, what about this? Lots of the people we work with don't have any of that. Quite a lot of people we're working with don't have any digital connectivity. If you're on universal credit, paying for Wi-Fi is not the top of the list when you haven't got food. And COVID has shown this, hasn't it? Like really amplifies some of these issues that we all thought some of this stuff was really silly. Free Wi-Fi for everyone. Who's going to pay for that? Actually, it's like, bloody hell, it's almost like one of the basic things in the Maslow, you've seen that Maslow thing, and they go like, free Wi-Fi, and then the next one below is like the battery life. That people don't have all of that always at their disposal, and if they do, they don't necessarily have the skills to look. But then it's like, where are you looking? And I think that's just something that the city region and other partners like that could really help to facilitate a lot more connectivity around that kind of stuff. I do still think it comes back down to, I think one of the solutions would be really interesting to see would be if even 25% of all the organisations in Liverpool City region open their doors, okay, when COVID's gone, open their doors and said, we welcome someone in for half a day a week, even a day a week, to come and work alongside our team, to come and volunteer in our organisation. Now, we all know people offer volunteering, but it's, your charity shops or maybe local community groups and things like this. So I want to see it in, we've been working with the University of Liverpool, the National Trust, Knowsley Safari Park, funnily enough, places like that who have done that. And they say, and that actually creates a lot of confidence in people who would never normally think they could go to a place like that and get a job there and work there. They're quite iconic places. Look at all the iconic places we've got at our disposal, and museums and galleries, the different venues, the interesting sport facilities, all this kind of thing. I would love to see opportunities galore created so that people are welcomed to something. It doesn't need to be a job. It's a pre-thing to a job, but it actually then, you've then met 10 people you didn't know before. Those 10 people know that you can do something, that you've shown that you can do something. And I just think we think too complicatedly about, we need these courses and training and go on that for a year and the rest of it, and we don't. And I just think that there's a lot of things we could probably do, and a lot of organisations around the city could jump in and really, I want to see Steve Rotherham badgering everybody to do something like that, like someone of that ilk that could really galvanise people around an idea that's a little bit different, and to create something between those disconnects between the opportunities, like the haves of the opportunities and the have-nots of the opportunities. We'd see loads of impact doing that.
Yeah, I think some really good points made. Just to let people know, we've had a problem with Zoom, so we can't do the breakout rooms. So I just encourage anyone who's got questions or has been saving themselves for the breakout room to kind of get involved now, or stick your hand up, or feel free to just unmute and shout us out. I don't think it'll get too hectic. I think we're all pretty well behaved here. Ben, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just think one of the things that Greg said was, how do we, how do we engage with people, i.e. employers, and get them to do this type of work when they're not really at that level themselves. And I think it goes down to meeting people at where they are, and taking them on that journey. And not everyone will be thinking on the same wavelength as everyone else, and some will be more radical, and some will be more cautious, and some will want to jump straight in, and others will want to just ease themselves in gently. And it's about working with them and giving them the encouragement to do that. I also think, and this is a big sector in this is a big problem in the third sector, is that no one thinks about marketing. So you know, Tracy's just been saying about all these opportunities, but not, you know, no one knows where to get them or to find them. And then I saw Paul posted about the LCR jobs website in the chat. And organizations in the third sector think that if you just post something on your Facebook page that 1 million people are going to turn up, and that's just not the case. And no one ever really thinks about investing properly in marketing campaigns and really trying to understand who your audience is and how you're going to reach them. And so I think what we need to do, and I've had this conversation with a number of funders as well, because I think funders are often a barrier to what organizations who have these opportunities can spend the money on. And sometimes things like marketing and digital marketing stuff, they don't really understand it. So they're like, well, we're not going to fund you to do that. And then the numbers for your engagement are low, and then they wonder why. And you can only rely so much on, you know, person to person and word of mouth, or, you know, putting posters up wherever. It's got to be like a holistic approach where you do a bit of digital engagement, you do some paid social media, you do some just normal social media, you reach out through your partners, you go into schools, you do whatever. And I think, you know, the capacity to put together a proper marketing campaign, whether that be for a job site or whether it be for an opportunity for young people, you know, is just lost on some people. And it's about helping them understand what they actually really need to do in order to make sure that that advert on Instagram pops up to the right demographic of people at the right time, when, do you know what I mean, and is consistent. Someone mentioned Agents Academy before, and they're a great organisation, and we worked with them last year to basically do a hate crime awareness campaign. And thankfully for us, the funding that we got, they were, you know, from the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, but they were really happy for us just to plough a load of money into this campaign, because if we didn't, we could have just said, hey, you can report something here and we can give you support. But actually no one really would have seen it, to be honest. But the fact that we had money to pump into it, and the fact that we worked with Agents Academy to get the young people to design and deliver and develop the campaign, you know, meant so much more, and made sure that the campaign went so much further than what it probably would have done if we would have just gone, this is us and whatever. So I think we have to meet people where they are and take them on that journey. And then we also have to really think about who our audience is and how we're going to target them, and don't be scared to throw a load of money into marketing, basically. And you might think that it just looks like it's going down the drain, but it's not.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I was on the Liverpool City Council's race quality task force, and the work we've done just come to an end. We've got some reports going out soon, but when we were doing work around employment and skills, that was kind of the main, I don't want to say excuse, but it was the excuse for employers was, you know, they just don't get the applicants, and they didn't really think, well, why do we ain't getting the applicants? Or
because people think that they'll just post a job on LinkedIn and that everyone's going to see it and flock to it and be like, yeah, loads of people aren't on LinkedIn. Someone said employers are lazy, and I think, you know, to a certain degree they are. I also think sometimes they just have so much stuff on that they can't think in the same way as that other people can. But it's like, no, if you want to attract people from a specific demographic, then you really need to understand who they are and where they're going to be. And if that means that you have to go to Smithdown Road and sit in raggers and just literally just talk to people and tell people that you've got these opportunities, then that's what you've got to do.
Yeah, it's about, I suppose you can say lazy or like time poor, but really it's about priorities, I guess. Paul, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, couldn't agree more with Ben about the issue of big organizations marketing badly and just using a corporate approach. So many of the times I've been able to apply for jobs because I knew where the jobs were being advertised. And, you know, the 190 jobs I was applying for was purely because I knew where they'd be advertised. Grassroots organizations in our communities are very often some of the best conduits. They're the trusted places. They're the organizations that employers and employing organizations should be reaching into and supporting them to pass on the job opportunities and the training opportunities where appropriate to enable people to get the skills to get the jobs. We've been pushing up this more and more, and yet I know that there are still organizations that I've supplied Twitter lists and details of community grassroots organizations to, and yet they still come back to me and say, oh, we've not really got anywhere with that job. And then I ask them again, did you take it to, you know, Granby Development Toxteth Trust? Did you take it to Steve Biko Housing? Did you take it to the whole list of organizations? Oh yeah, I didn't get around to it. And they, you know, they are so lazy, and then they wonder why they're failing. But I do think it's time for organizations to set targets, not just about race, not just about disability, but also about class. Interestingly enough, the civil service does it a little bit in terms of it uses the basic metric of what proportion of staff have had preschool meals when they were at school. It's not a perfect metric, but it's a measurement at least of intent. And I think if more organizations did it, then perhaps, you know, there'd be more opportunities because there'd be a target for people to reach.
Yeah, that's really good points. Jack, can I come to you next, please?
Do you want to go before me? Well, I've already asked the question.
Sure. Thank you, Jack. That's very polite. Yeah, my question is open to anyone really. Tracy, I know that you've got experience with this through Transform Lives, but I'm aware that there's things like agent marketing, agent academy, sorry, even. Also Leap from Agent, there's something in Manchester called Juice, which is similar, Juice Academy. And obviously before we were talking about like going into schools and things like that. So there's a lot of things kind of, well, not a lot, but there's becoming more things for young people, which is great. But something that I've thought about from speaking to some people who are 40 plus and jobless is that like people in that demographic often get left behind. And it feels like whenever something like a program or a government initiative is released, it's always for young people, like the Kickstart scheme or things like that. So my question would be, how do we make sure that people of like older demographics aren't getting left behind? Because true diversity does take in age into account as well.
Amber, I could give you a hug through the screen. That question. I was thinking about today, one of the things I wanted to get across was let's not just drift into talking about young people. I think there's a few things with this. One is the situation that we're in actually right now, which is a consequence of COVID and in previous recessions, like 10 years ago with the financial crash and times before then and forever and ever. There's a cycle of these things. Young people are always the ones who disproportionately are negatively affected. So that is a fact borne out in the statistics, right? So they lose their jobs first when there's a financial crisis, you know, an economic crisis, and they find it harder to compete as well. So because other people have lost their jobs of other ages and they've got a longer CV, basically. So they get a double whammy. They're leaving education, they've not really got the work experience, they're competing with someone who's just on a job. So at times like this, focusing on young people is the right thing to do. And that's why we've got things like Kickstart and there's £2 billion there. And if any of you are employers and you've not got a Kickstart job yet, do not delay because it runs out in December. However, the next biggest demographic that are affected, and this is a constant, are the over 50s. And you're right, then things sort of tail off. And there's a, let's say, this probably isn't the right phrase, but it's not as sexy to stand up for the older people when you're a politician. And so actually saying a youth guarantee and young people and they're our future and future talent and all the rest of it is a vote winner type of thing. Like people aren't gonna, no one's gonna argue with that because everyone's been young. Otherwise we wouldn't be here. So, but we haven't, not always, like, you know, you're not all like over 50 like me, so you're not always feeling like what it's like to be older and disadvantaged. And I think it is a forgotten group of people. They're mostly, other than Kickstart, they're mostly the people we do work with. And often what we find is what is needed is a combination of well-being and mental health work and employment work, and usually starting with that, the first thing, and moving on to the work thing. So it actually is a more blended, kind of gentler approach that you need. And it comes back to that thing I said at the beginning about being nurtured. Isn't just nurturing young talent, it's not just about young people, it's nurturing people who quite often feel broken, it's shattered by what's happened in their life, and feel like the system is conspiring against them. So universal credit is a regime that is a nightmare for some people when you're stuck in it. And the other bit of it, the toxic combination really is a benefit regime that's really tricky to navigate and live on. And we all know about the £20 uplift and all of that now. And a job market that is typified by 0 hours contracts a lot of the time for entry-level jobs. So actually you put the two things together, and if you're on universal credit and 0 hours, you are all over the place. That is really difficult. And this is why it's actually quite, it takes a long time for people to get through that process and to feel safe and secure enough and to move on in a way that is sustainable and things like that. So, sorry, it's a long answer, but that group of people, which is a massive cohort of massively diverse variety of issues. But I do think that there are big sort of systemic issues. And I think that employers need to really question themselves about the type of jobs that they keep, you know, on with, you know, 0 hours, poor conditions, insecure work, don't know how many hours you've got from one week to the next. And it actually conspires to keep people where they are, because that's a lot safer. If your housing benefits dependent on it, that means your roof over your head's dependent on it. That means your kids often, you know, are they homeless? Do you know what I mean? So there's an awful lot to it, and there's bigger things at stake that stop people from moving on. It's very rational decisions that people make.
Yeah, we've heard quite a lot about like forgotten groups tonight. Like I think you forget how many strands diversity actually has to it. But when you talk about employment and skills, you really have got to dive quite deep into all of them, it feels like. Jack, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't unmute them. Yeah, actually just building on what Tracy just touched on then, and something that Paul mentioned earlier on. So before I worked for Matchstick, I worked briefly in the disability sector. And I'm just wondering, my statistics are a little bit cheeky, but I'm pretty sure that the disabled are the highest percentage of unemployed people. They are. But more than that, I was thinking sort of about mental health within that. The statistics on that are less available. How do you facilitate, and this is both individuals and employers, but how do you facilitate people with both physical disabilities and mental health issues into getting back into the back into workplaces and into jobs that aren't going to be toxic, the wrong word, but like detrimental, and cause them to go backwards in certain aspects. Getting the people into the right jobs is the way I should have phrased that.
Finding supportive environments is crucial. There are good employers out there, but they're not the majority. You might find better volunteering opportunities in the first instance in terms of environments that might be supportive. Ideally, I'd love to say every employer in the city region is going to be dead supportive and dead great. They're not. There is a disability confidence scheme that the national government have brought out, which does identify employers who claim to be supportive. Many of them might be brilliant if you were a wheelchair user, or perhaps not. But if you've got a hidden disability, like mental health issues or learning disabilities, some of them are absolutely hopeless because they don't know what to do. We're doing an awful lot to try and address that, and I'm working currently with an organisation called 6% and Rising. It's worth having a look at what 6% and Rising are doing. 6% and Rising is the tongue-in-cheek name given by themselves to a group set up by a young man called Harry, who went to SEND school in our city region and was very fortunate enough to get a supported internship. Those supported internships help make sure that Harry is part of the 6%. And that 6% figure, or actually 5.8%, is the proportion of kids from SEND schools with an education and healthcare plan who end up in a job in this country, just under 6%. In Canada, they achieve 49% with the same cohort. It's about the culture of employers. Supported internships provide fantastic opportunities for both employers to realise the worth of these young people, but also for young people to realise their worth in the workplace. I've spoken to kids, I say kids, young people who've gone through a supported internship, who've had the privilege of having their first beer with a workmate, of taking part in banter in the workplace that was safe and supportive and not bullying in any form. Stuff that they never envisaged that they would be able to do because they're neurodiverse or they've got other learning difficulties. There's so much to be done with workplaces to make them more attractive, to make them more supportive. There is some stuff out there and we're trying to get more of it. But check out the politics show on BBC on Sunday and you'll hear more about 6% and Rising then. I've been helping him try and get access to the BBC, the Metro Mayor and others in order to pull together the piece that he's putting out there.
Yeah, sounds really good. I'll keep an eye out for that. Amanda, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so Paul's right. Like I work with ASC schools, so autism spectrum condition schools particularly, because they're a talent pool that people don't tap into. They're just one of the talent pools that people disregard, and they shouldn't be. And the supported internships has worked really well within those schools, and students going in and basically they have somebody go into the job place with them. And it comes back to what Tracy was saying in terms of lazy employers sometimes. So for example, when somebody, they might be on the spectrum, but actually they might have any form of disability, whether it be physical or they might have some mental health challenges at the time. You can break down jobs to give people value. So for example, on this supported internship, somebody's job might be gathering stuff off a printer and sorting it out to deliver it to the right people in that office. It's as simple as that. That's what that supported internship person does. It gives them a sense of value. It gives them a sense of what it's like to work in an office and that experience. And it's a really easy thing to chunk these jobs. If you look in hospitality, you've got people who their role is to carry plates into the right place. So there is a way of creating these roles for people to do, if from easing back into the workplace or from doing it ongoing. And it's just not there. And looking from an employer's point of view, and Kath's actually mentioned it, employers are busy and they've got a lot to think about. And one of the things we're trying to do actually in the Liverpool City region, in terms of trying to get people in a middle layer who've got experience, is giving employers some help to really navigate this. So it's not only people looking for jobs who are having to navigate it, but employers have to navigate this scene and look at, well, if it's Kickstarter, how do I actually operate in that? You know, apprenticeships is another thing. Like, it's a real scary thing for an employer to navigate apprenticeships. And if you look at small organizations, which, you know, we have a lot of in Liverpool, in terms of that, they don't have an HR function who can concentrate on that. So you've got CEOs who are trying to run their businesses, who are also trying to navigate who can I bring in, and actually what they do, they'll just post out a job ad because they don't have time to think about it and sit down and do it. So collectively in Liverpool City region, it's really looking at how do we look at helping those organizations navigate how they can get and give employment. How do they give skills? But when they're a small organization, we do have a lot of incubators, startups and whatever. And that's one of the things that is an ask actually our sector has had to the combined authority, and potentially even going upwards into central government, is how do we get a function here that can help our employers navigate this scene to be able to create more opportunities?
Yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff to unpack there. I just want to mention that I know we are about to run over time, so if people do need to shoot, just feel free, and I'll share the screen recording with you. I'll just come to these last couple of questions, and then I think we'll wrap up. Greg, do you want to come in?
Sorry, I was muted then. I was going to say, Max, do you want to go? Because I've already spoken. So.
Oh, thanks, Greg. It's just a quick point, actually, just off the back of what Paul said about employers in the region, and what was said earlier about L1 and retention. I think something that employers should really consider is for employees with mental health issues who are classed as disabled who declare it, is having like a policy or training in place so that when those employees display signs of their mental illness, then there are people equipped to know how to help those employees to avoid either them leaving or bullying in the workplace, or long time sick leave, for example. So it's what I've kind of found over the years as someone with like clinical mental health issues for over 20 years, but I'm a functional person most of the time. But I've found that it's all very well to tick that mental health quota, but they can't handle you when you're not healthy. And that is something that I think is really missing in the Liverpool region. I don't know what anyone else thinks about that. Yeah, that's it.
I think it's missing generally, isn't it, Max? You know, yeah. It's not just Liverpool City region. I think that's the thing, isn't it? If people have got jobs, the last thing we need is for them to lose them for lack of understanding and a lack of care or thought about being accommodating and understanding and changing things around to sort of help people get through, like you say, you're well most of the time, and then sometimes it's not great. So I completely agree. And I think, you know, there's a lot of talk about mental health, you know, big slogans and things like that, but it's the practical application of it on a daily basis, isn't it? That
yeah, and I think it becomes
the difference.
Sorry, Tracy, sorry. It's, you know, the mental health awareness hashtag and the mental health awareness week, it's so glossy and shiny that no employer can handle the absolute ugliness of a mental health crisis, you know, and that's not disrespectful ugliness, but it's not pretty when someone is in crisis, and there's an absolute disconnect between all the exercises that companies are doing to raise awareness of mental health and their actions towards employees. I know I'm repeating myself, but yeah.
My philosophy is, if employers can't handle us or support us at our shaved head Britney Spears, they don't deserve us at our hit me baby one more time Britney Spears. That's my philosophy on it.
On that note,
Brilliant.
that is brilliant.
Yeah.
I'd also like at this point to plug the Fair Employment Charter, which does really demand that employers treat people with dignity and respect. Additionally, join a union. Trade unions have on more than one occasion saved my bacon. They've been there for me. It costs, but that kind of mutual support can be absolutely invaluable.
Cool, thank you.
If I remember rightly, there's similar to a first aider, there's a mental health first aider award that certificate
Yeah,
that
I've done
employees
that.
can get.
I've done that training
Yeah.
really well, yeah. Yeah.
I'm not too sure about any details around it, but that sounds like a
Tracy,
sensible idea.
haven't you put everyone through first aid, mental health first aid training at Transform Lives?
A couple of people, yeah.
Yeah, it's excellent.
Through. Can't afford everyone.
Yeah. It's really
but yeah, you can do that.
And there's also the Zero Suicide Alliance training, which is really good, and it's free, and it's online.
I've taken the light and the full version out. It is excellent.
Nice one, Jack. Really, really good to hear that being taken up.
What, Paul, what's it called? Zero Suicide Alliance?
Yeah, just Google it, and
okay, cool.
You know, and if anyone sees anything on it which they're not happy with, by the way, they love getting feedback and improving it because they want to get it right.
Oh, thank you, Paul.
For the Samaritans as well. So the Samaritans will do free training in the workplace, and they'll do it on Zoom, and that, you know, that's brilliant. And it isn't wholly around the sort of suicide aspect, which obviously we know them for, but the wider kind of stuff around mental health, and it's free. So we've been doing that as well.
I'm just conscious we're 5 minutes over. I think we've lost a few of our attendees as well. Greg, have you got a point to finish on?
Well, I'm not sure I can top that Britney Spears comment. But it was sort of some of the themes, and it was sort of touching on sort of something you said earlier, Ben, and Amanda, you mentioned about sort of HR within kind of small businesses and that kind of thing. There's the idea of like, you know, having the opportunities for people is great, but perhaps even before you have those, you need to make sure that the working environment is safe and appropriate for people, because there's no point getting people in and then not being able to sort of support them properly and have a safe environment. As Jack mentioned earlier, you know, people might end up feeling worse, and then it's that kind of thing again where the onus is almost on the employer to sort of do that. But if they're not doing that already, or not already kind of engaged in finding out about what they could be doing better, you know, it's kind of like how do you get them involved in order to try and create these sort of safe places for people? And yeah, it's a bit of an open question, really.
I think that's a good point to finish on. Does anyone want to respond before we sign off?
We're trying to do that through the Fair Employment Charter in part, but also, I'd also say again, join a union, because no matter how good an employer says they are, there's always going to be a rogue manager, there's always going to be a colleague who's a complete so-and-so, and having the backup and support of people through a trade union can be absolutely invaluable, because they're with you right from day one.
And as Paul says, and I think the saying goes, you join a company, but you leave a manager. And you know, I've been in companies in the past that had all of this, all this support and actually, you know, suffered terribly at the hands of one person in that organization. So culturally, they might give the lip service to it, but actually you need to see the staff behaviours reflecting what they're saying from that culture. So hopefully that with the Fair Employment Charter and those coming through, those people within those organisations, because very often say the best will is there, that those people within them who don't fit in that culture could be held to account. And I think that's the biggest thing, is to hold these people, the individuals, not just the companies, the individuals to account within those companies, which sometimes just get swept under the carpet and paid off. You see it, they go into, you know, they might have a trade union, they might go to court over it even, but it then gets paid off and it's never gets, you know, the golden handshakes and never gets spoken about again. And actually, you know, holding people to account to make sure that it can't happen again, making sure those people are forced to go on trainings or whatever needs to happen, I think. And once we start doing that, we can start, you know, if it means enforcing cultures in workplaces, then so be it. If it means that we can bring in happier people and retain them.
Okay, thanks for that, Amanda, and thank you everyone for coming to this event today. I think we'll wrap up there just because we're 9 minutes over. But thank you all again for coming. If anyone's got any questions or anything, feel free to email me. I'll make any kind of necessary introductions as well. We'll also be publishing this screen recording with a blog post probably sometime next week, realistically. And lastly, if I sent out a survey today, so if people have had a chance to fill it in, that's great. But if not, try and find some time to fill it in, please. It'd be really helpful. But yeah, thanks again for coming, everyone, and hopefully see you at the next one. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. See ya.
Bye.
See you soon.